Hello, everyone. My name is Annie O'Shaughnessy, and I am the co-founder and co-executive director of Starling Collaborative here in Vermont. I am also the coordinator and founder of the Holistic Restorative Education Certificate Program at St. Michael's, online graduate certificate program. I'm here today to talk about a really important subject, which is creating brave spaces. So over the years, I have been pretty obsessed with how to create the conditions in which youth and adults both can find the courage to name harm they see and feel themselves, acknowledge harm they've done, and work collaboratively with others to pave a way forward, to repair the harm, to make plans. And it's surprisingly difficult to do, but it's so essential to restorative practices. So if we implement restorative practices without creating brave spaces, what I would call spaces that have a lot of ballast. So if you've heard me talk before about ballast, it's that weight at the bottom of a sailboat or boat that allows us to tip in hard seas without flipping. So it holds us steady. And what we know about social neuroscience, social theory, all the things, is that, and research by the Center for Disease Control, is that a sense of connectedness, sense of safety, a sense of voice, sense of belonging, having the capacity in our nervous systems and the skills to engage and the motivation, wanting to care enough, are all needed in our boat to navigate the very kind of unsettling waters of restorative practices. Okay, restorative justice, people, I kind of laugh when people say it lacks it's easy, it's soft, because when done well, it's actually really hard. It's hard to sit and talk about how you've been harmed, or sit and talk about harm that you've done and acknowledge it. So that is a very strong message for me, that we can't get around this. We can't just do circles or do a restorative conference and expect people to share and things to happen if we haven't built the culture and community in which people feel safe enough to do this. And this is a specific use of the word brave space versus safe space. I am quite adamant that unless you are creating an affinity group with very strong guardrails and agreements, we can't ensure safety in most spaces. And even in safe spaces, affinity groups, there is still the risk of doing each other harm, right? So we talk about brave spaces, at least I do. And the most important part to me of the brave space is to slow down. And time is the enemy of restorative practices. Creating brave spaces takes time. So honestly, it would take me the first 3 weeks of the school year to really get ourselves set up and feeling brave in our class, so that we could do restorative circles, we could do anything with some success. But that time spent paid off. And you hear that from every person who's put in the time, that the time you spend putting off content to build a restorative, brave space will pay off down the line. So I always come back to this. This is our framework for everything we do. But what is that time we're talking about? The time we're talking about is time we spend setting up our space by pausing, setting up shared agreements, checking in, building a relationship, exploring topics, and reflecting how are we doing with our agreements. And these rituals, whether it's in a circle shape or just in conversation, are central to this sense of courage, because we're given opportunities to name how we're doing, given opportunities to engage meaningfully, given opportunities to say, hey, at the end, we didn't really do what we set out to do. Who's doing what? Kinds of questions. All right. And of course, this is where Indigenous brain science has finally caught up with Indigenous wisdom that says, for us to be our best selves, us to be brave and courageous, we need to regulate first before we can relate and before we can do those hard things that take a lot of reasoning power and presence. All right. So this is my practice that I use with students and myself to slow down. You can find your own that you're comfortable with. Don't need to call it mindfulness. I actually ask you not to. Usually, most of the time, people have a lot of associations, varied associations with mindfulness. Some are really negative, especially some students of mine had very negative associations with mindfulness from school. So let's just call it slowing down. And this poem, I'm going to take a moment to read because it is really what we're talking about. Together we will create brave space because there is no such thing as a safe space because we exist in a real world. We all carry scars and we have all caused wounds. So in this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side. To me, this is by Mickey Scott Bay Jones from a poem she adapted by Beth Strano. To me, this is the epitome of a restorative philosophy. We will work on it side by side. So at the beginning of the year, my go-to spiel to students was, hey, welcome everybody. First day, we're going to do some get to know you activities. And one of the first things that I want to talk about is that we're on this boat together till June, and we're going to have some rough seas. We're going to get sick of each other. You're going to get annoyed with me. I'm going to get annoyed with you. We might even raise our voices. You might want to leave. I might want you to leave. At the end of the day, we're kind of stuck together, and we got to figure this out. So we're going to spend a good amount of time these first 3 weeks in learning about each other, building some what I will call ballast, which is the strength to stick together in hard times, and kind of learn what we each need to thrive here together. So please bear with me as we go through this process, and I guarantee you we will have a lot more fun learning together, and we'll be a lot more effective together if we take this time. So that's kind of in a nutshell, a very shortened version of my spiel at the beginning of the year to give the reason why we're putting off academics, and kids deserve that. This is so we can learn better. This is so we can thrive in a learning community. And one of the first things we get to is, how are you doing, and what do you need when you're not doing well, and how can you get what you need in a pro-social way that does not disrupt learning. So that's it. That's what we're trying to do for kids and for ourselves. Is you as an educator cannot be the one person responsible for everyone's needs. That is a recipe for burnout, and it's not humanly possible. So what we're doing instead in a restorative, holistic, restorative, brave space is to create the opportunity. So create the awareness through check-ins of how we're doing, and then create the strategies and practice them, that each person in that space knows how to regulate themselves and what is pro-social and not pro-social way to regulate themselves. So as you hopefully learned in the rules of the brain, there are many non-pro-social ways to relieve our stress: yelling, fighting, kicking, screaming, checking out. There's running. There's so many. And we live in a time where youth are experiencing stress at such a high level, their little bodies are doing these things to relieve stress autonomically, meaning unconsciously. So we need to make, unfortunately, stress conscious, and then give them strategies they can use themselves so they can feel empowered and not so out of control. So the key to this is that we have to model it. So if I come in, we do a little check-in, and here is something very specific. It is not your job to be a therapist. You're not having a circle or circle up protocol and saying, okay, we're going to circle up and everyone's going to share, how are you doing today? How are you doing today is not a great question for a math teacher, English teacher, anybody but a school counselor to ask, because you will get someday, if you keep asking that question, you'll get a lot more than you bargained for. And that's not the purpose of it. What we want to do instead is for youth and ourselves to slow down, check in. Whoa, I'm coming in hot today. I need to take a few breaths. Or students like, oh, I am almost in the red zone. That's the zones of regulation language. And I need to go get a drink of water before I start. I'm really restless. So I see this over and over again, that youth come in dysregulated, because I do I supervise student teachers at St. Mike's. And one of the biggest problems that those young teachers have is that they see a young person come into the classroom dysregulated, and that young person might shove someone's book or make a big noise or something. And their first instinct is that this kid is misbehaving and needs to be punished, to tell you the truth. When what I'm seeing is a really dysregulated student who needs to find a way to basically bring themselves within the window of tolerance so they can operate. So okay, I'm going to pause here and just say, we are in a different time as educators, and what we used to do no longer works. And then, so I'm sorry, it's just kind of like a leveling up of our skill set, and we should be taught this in our teacher prep programs, but it's new, like it is at a new level. So just as a kind of acknowledgement, you're probably wondering, like, why do I have to know all this stuff? I'm a math teacher, but unfortunately, with the level of anxiety and stress kids are experiencing in today's classrooms in their lives, we have to. So anyways, back to the lesson. If I come in, someone cut me off in traffic and I come in at an 8, what's really helpful to this approach with students is, like, I'm coming in at 8, kids, so we're gonna do a little coloring mandala for 3 minutes, or I'm gonna do some breathing. Anyone can join me, but the modeling is super powerful if you can do that as an adult. All right, the next thing for brave space is, and in creating agreements, is like, you have to create that balance through shared values, shared experiences. So always, like, what's the last thing that brought you joy? Just write it on a piece of paper, read it out loud, whatever it is. But how can we connect across our differences with things that are really simple? So I needed to bring that in there before we do this hard work of making agreements. So first, what I'm talking about agreements, I'm talking about strategies we can agree on to meet the needs of the group in order to thrive in a learning community. We can meet for each other and for ourselves, to take the healthy risks and be effective, collaborative, and authentically engaged members of a community. So a group might make an agreement to break every hour to meet the need for movement. So we're talking about specific strategies that can be done versus what might be called ethos. It's the character, credibility, and moral values a group or individual has. So often schools, for example, choose words to represent their ethos, like caring, courageous, and cooperative, or some other words. And they're great. A group might decide, like one of mine, they had an ethos of be respectful, admit when you're wrong, be authentic, and be helpful. So that was their ethos. But there's really no action connected to that. It's aspirational. So I want to make sure you know that I'm not discouraging this. It's so important to be aspirational and to have a vision for who you want to be as individuals. That's very different from crafting specific agreements in a group. So the way I start out, well, first of all, I want to acknowledge that many of you already do in your spaces figure out, do a collaborative process where you ask students what are the expectations in a learning space that'll help us all be safe and learn well. And kids will raise their hand and say things like take turns, keep our hands to ourselves, because they know that there's things. I would argue that those are kind of rules. Like, we can't have hands all over each other and learn. We need to come on time. So I'm a big proponent of kind of calling it what it is, which is there are rules of being in school, and school will be chaos without them. So we're going to agree on some rules, but then we're going to dig into what we need to really thrive. So the first activity is to share with a partner as many details as you can about a time when you felt engaged and were thriving in a learning community. What needs were being met? You're thinking about all the details of that. When you felt you had the capacity, skill, and motivation to really dig into that experience. It could be scouts, it could be sports, it could be classroom. Okay, and then I ask them to look at a list, and for really young ones, it's a very simplified list, or even like icons um, of different qualities that they might have experienced in that space. But I'm asking for 3 words, 3 needs that were being met to make that experience so engaging, where you've thrived. So for someone, it might be freedom, connection, and trust. All right, and we make a word cloud out of it. This word cloud, or whatever kind of representation you want to make. I like word clouds because they obviously the bigger the word, the more responses. And this one is so representative of all the ones I've done: connection, trust, belonging, acceptance, respect, community, communication, choice. These are all always there, almost always there. You got some structure here, consistency. So pretty much we know this to be true over and over again about what we need. But it's interesting how rarely we create strategies in our classroom to specifically meet those needs together. And that's what this process is about. So the next thing you do is draft some strategies together to try as a group, and just trying is the operative word. You're going to try them out and see if they work. So over here in this yellow, it's like being kind is not a strategy, but using the word ouch when something has landed hard, and then pausing is a strategy. Okay? We're going to agree to try that strategy. Here are some others. A need might be connection. We might agree as a group to create time every day or every week for quick connection activity. For trust, we might use low risk and fun activities to get to know each other over time. We might review agreements that were made at the end of every meeting to make sure people do what they say they're going to do. We might communicate, send out an agenda the day before meeting or class, alert us to any changes. So on and on it goes. But as you can see, the strategies are super specific. And usually what I do is create an ethos. I collect what they want from a group and separate that from the actual strategies. So here is one of those where people wrote about that learning community where they were thriving. And then we together pasted together a lot of the statements that, made up their ethos: honor individuality, communicate respect, slow down, get curious, reflect on your resistance, take responsibility. That's an ethos. That's a kind of aspirational, and it's powerful. During the semester class, the educators made this. We read it a few times, and each time someone kind of teared up. It's a powerful representation of what we wanted to be together. Okay, so these kind of things kind of go side by side. Yeah, so that's the process. There is a needs and strategies facilitators guide. What I ask is that you make it your own. We're still tinkering with it because each group is different, but the core part that you stick with is this concept that I have individual needs, but usually they're shared. And it's kind of also, I have the individual needs I have, say it's for fun. I have some responsibility to speak up for those needs and help create strategies. It's not up to everybody else to guess what I need. Okay, finally, the last step, I didn't have a slide for this, but we would do is, what does it look like, it sound like when your needs aren't met? And how can we best support you? So a student might say, I get really restless when we don't have enough movement. Like, okay, so what do you need? What can we do for you when that happens? You can just remind me to go get a glass, drink of water, and I'll do better. Or can I be the one in charge of making sure we take brain breaks? Right. So that's a great example of one student going, hey, I need a lot of movement. Most classes don't provide it. And then you ask them, okay, so what are some ways we can build movement into our class time? Or in my class, kids really loved humor because it was a sleepy time of day and they wanted to laugh. And we had once a week some funny cat videos. Someone would choose a funny cat video. In this way, we co-create the space. And then when things go awry, we just have these agreements to come back to, and we say, what did we miss here? Because things went awry, and we need to create some more agreements or review our agreements. Okay. I hope this feels good to you, and that you are excited to explore it and kind of make it your own. It's evolving. All right. Thank you.